Happy anniversary to us, I whispered bitterly, standing frozen in the doorway of our bedroom. Richard didn't notice me. He was too focused on the phone call, his voice low and calculated as he confirmed his plans with his lawyer. Yes, tomorrow, after the anniversary dinner. Once she's emotional about the gift, I'll tell her I want a divorce. The timing ensures she won't think clearly about the settlement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal champagne flute I'd been carrying slipped slightly. In my trembling hand, the expensive vintage we'd been saving for 15 years of marriage now tasting like poison on my tongue. I should have known something was wrong when Richard had suddenly become interested in planning our anniversary celebration after years of forgetting the date entirely. Let's do something special this year, he'd insisted with that practiced smile, the same one he'd used to charm clients at his investment firm for 2 decades. The afternoon had started perfectly. I'd left work early to prepare, stopping by the French bakery for his favorite dessert, chilling the champagne we'd bought on our honeymoon in Napa. 15 years together, building a life, supporting his career through its ups and downs, renovating our Victorian home in Portland's West Hills neighborhood. I'd even wrapped the vintage watch I'd secretly saved for, planning to surprise him over dinner. Now I understood why he'd been checking his own watch so frequently these past months, counting down to his calculated exit. Before we dive deeper into my story, take a moment to subscribe to this channel if stories about overcoming betrayal resonate with you. Tomorrow's video reveals the 3 steps I took to rebuild my life that anyone can apply to their own journey of recovery. I backed away from the doorway silently, muscle memory carrying me down our winding staircase past framed photos from happier times, hiking in the Cascades, sailing on the Willamette, hosting charity galas where Richard would proudly introduce me as the woman who made it all possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had made it all possible, including the inheritance from my family's business that had funded his first investment venture when no bank would take a chance on him. In our gourmet kitchen, the one I'd designed during last year's renovation, I set down the champagne flute with unnatural precision. My mind raced even as my body moved with strange calm. The inheritance, the family trust that Richard had convinced me to restructure last year for tax purposes. The paperwork I'd signed giving him access as a co-trustee. The millions that had been earmarked for both our retirements but were still legally mine alone for the next 24 hours until the anniversary of my father's death, after which the revised trust terms would make it nearly impossible to separate our finances. Richard's timing wasn't just cruel, it was calculated down to the day. He planned to divorce me the night before my family's inheritance permanently merged with our marital assets. Olivia? My assistant Zoe's concerned voice cut through the fog of betrayal. I'd forgotten she was still here, organizing the catering for the intimate anniversary dinner Richard had insisted on hosting at our home tomorrow. Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. One look at my face and Zoe knew something was terribly wrong. She'd been with me through my father's death, through building my interior design firm from nothing while Richard focused on his more important finance career. She knew me better than anyone, perhaps better than the man I'd shared my bed with for 15 years. He's planning to divorce me, I managed, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. Tomorrow, after our anniversary dinner. What? Zoe set down the table linens she'd been arranging, moving quickly to my side. How do you know? I heard him on the phone with his lawyer. It's all planned, Zoe. The timing, the settlement, everything. Understanding dawned on her face. The trust transition date, tomorrow. I nodded, the betrayal crystallizing into something harder, colder. $20 million, my father's legacy. Richard's been waiting for the right moment, and apparently, it's our 15th anniversary dinner. Zoe's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. What can I do? The question cut through my numbness. What could I do? Richard had orchestrated everything perfectly. The romantic anniversary as cover for the divorce announcement, the timing with the trust transition, even the way he'd suggested I take the afternoon off to relax before our celebration, knowing it would give him privacy for last-minute arrangements. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Call Nathan, I said decisively, referring to my father's longtime attorney. Tell him it's an emergency and I need to meet him today. Then cancel the caterers for tomorrow, but make it look like a reschedule, not a cancellation. And Richard can't know, Zoe finished for me, already reaching for her phone. Not yet. A plan was forming, fragmented but gaining clarity with each passing second. He thinks tomorrow night is his carefully orchestrated finale. Let him believe that until the final curtain. As Zoe made the call to Nathan, I moved to my home office, the one space Richard rarely entered, dismissing my design work as a cute hobby, despite the fact that my firm had restored some of Portland's most iconic historical buildings. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the antique secretary desk my father had given me, retrieving the original trust documents I'd kept despite Richard's insistence that we only needed digital copies for simplicity. 15 minutes later, Zoe returned, her expression grim but determined. Nathan can see you at 5, and I spoke with the caterers. As far as they know, we're just adjusting the menu for tomorrow. Perfect. I glanced at my watch, 3:30 p.m. Richard wouldn't be home until at least 7, claiming a client meeting that I now suspected involved his lawyer. We have a small window. I need you to do something else for me. Anything. Go to the office and gather every financial document we have. Client contracts, invoices, especially anything with Richard's signature or involvement, and the backup drive from the safe. Zoe's eyes widened slightly. You think he's touched the business? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not taking any chances. Not anymore. As Zoe left for my office downtown, I made my way upstairs, moving quietly despite knowing Richard was gone. Our bedroom, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, now felt like a crime scene, evidence of betrayal lurking in every corner. I changed quickly from my anniversary outfit into something more businesslike, armor for the battle ahead. In Richard's home office, I hesitated only briefly before entering. How many times had I respected his privacy, accepting his closed door as a boundary I shouldn't cross? That deference seemed laughable now. I moved methodically, photographing documents, checking drawers, and finally accessing his computer. The password came to me immediately. Hampton 2008, the year and location of his first major investment success. Richard's ego had always been his blind spot. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Email exchanges with his lawyer dating back 6 months, outlining divorce strategy. Financial projections showing how he planned to leverage my inheritance for a new investment fund after our separation. Consultations with a real estate agent about bachelor apartments in the Pearl District. Most damning of all, a calendar reminder for tomorrow. Anniversary dinner 7 p.m. Divorce discussion 9 p.m. Call Meredith after. Meredith. The name struck like a physical blow. I recognized it immediately. Meredith Chen, the investment banker. From Seattle, who'd been calling our home with suspicious frequency. Each time, Richard had stepped outside to take her calls, claiming they were just discussing a potential client. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us. Now back to the story. I photographed everything, hands steady despite the rage building inside me. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a calculated heist of my family's legacy, timed to mathematical precision. By the time I arrived at Nathan's office in a gleaming downtown tower, I'd moved beyond shock to a strange, focused clarity. The older attorney greeted me with concern, his gray eyes sharp behind round spectacles. He'd known my family for 3 generations and had never quite warmed to Richard. "Olivia, what's happened?" he asked, ushering me into his wood-paneled office with its view of the Willamette River. "Richard is planning to divorce me tomorrow night," I stated, my voice clinical. "After the trust transition date." Nathan's expression darkened. "I warned your father about including Richard as a co-trustee." "I know. I should have listened to both of you." I placed my phone on his desk, displaying the evidence I'd gathered. "But that's not why I'm here. I need to know my options. Today, before the transition date." For the next hour, Nathan reviewed the trust documents, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Finally, he removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The good news is that until midnight tomorrow, you have complete discretion over the trust assets. The transition to co-trustee status only happens at 12:01 a.m. on the anniversary of your father's death. And after that? After that, any major changes would require Richard's signature as well. He could effectively block you from making substantial withdrawals or donations." The word donations caught my attention. "What about charitable contributions? Are there any restrictions on those before the transition?" A hint of a smile touched Nathan's lips. "None whatsoever. In fact, your father specifically included provisions encouraging philanthropic use of the funds. Up to 100% of the trust could be directed to approved charitable organizations at your discretion. And Richard couldn't reverse those donations. After becoming co-trustee? No, once the money leaves the trust for charitable purposes, it's irrevocable." Nathan studied me carefully. "What are you thinking, Olivia?" I leaned forward, a plan crystallizing. "I need a list of every charitable organization my father supported, and I need to know how quickly we can execute substantial donations. Wire transfers could be completed today, with the proper authorization." Nathan's expression was carefully neutral, though I detected a gleam of approval in his eyes. "Which organizations did you have in mind?" "All of them," I replied, a sense of righteous purpose replacing my earlier despair. "But I'll need something else first, proof that these donations were part of my long-term plan, predating any knowledge of Richard's divorce strategy." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "Establishing prior intent." "Exactly. Richard will claim I transferred the money out of spite when he asks for divorce. I need documentation showing these donations were planned well before today." "That's ethically complex," Nathan hedged, though I noticed he hadn't refused. "More or less ethical than planning to divorce your wife the day before you gain control of her family's money?" I countered. Without another word, Nathan opened his desk drawer and withdrew a leather-bound notebook. Let's discuss how your father always intended this money to support causes he cared about. A conversation we've been having for months about honoring his legacy. By the time I left Nathan's office, we had drafted backdated memos outlining a philanthropic strategy allegedly developed over several months, with today's transfers representing the culmination of that plan. It wasn't strictly above board, but Nathan had assured me it would create enough documentation to withstand scrutiny if Richard contested the donations. Zoe was waiting in my car, a secure file box beside her containing everything from my office. "Did you get what you needed from Nathan?" "Yes," I replied, starting the engine. "But we need more. Richard's not just been planning divorce. He's been having an affair with Meredith Chen from Seattle Capital." Zoe's expression hardened. "The one who keeps calling the house? That tracks. What do you need me to do next?" "Call Denise." Denise. Williams had been my closest friend since college, and now ran one of Portland's most respected private investigation firms. "Tell her I need everything she can find on Richard's connection to Meredith Chen, professionally and personally. And I need it by tonight." As we drove through Portland's rain-slicked streets, I outlined the rest of my plan to Zoe. It was audacious, potentially risky, but the alternative, allowing Richard to walk away with my family's legacy after betraying our marriage, was unthinkable. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked when I finished explaining. "Once it's done, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "He planned this down to the day, Zoe. He's been lying to my face for months while plotting to take everything. He doesn't get to win. Not like this." Back at home, I moved with renewed purpose. First, I transferred all my personal belongings, from our joint bank accounts to my private account, the one Richard had dismissed as my mad money for feminine frivolities. Next, I secured all my important documents and irreplaceable keepsakes, placing them in a travel bag that I asked Zoe to store at her apartment. "What about tomorrow?" she asked as she prepared to leave with my belongings. "Are you still going through with the anniversary dinner?" "Absolutely," I replied, a grim smile forming. Richard planned a perfect scene for his announcement. It would be a shame to deny him his moment in the spotlight. After Zoe left, I moved through our home with strange detachment, seeing it now as merely the stage for tomorrow's final act. In the kitchen, I opened the champagne Richard and I were supposed to share tonight, pouring myself a glass as I opened my laptop. By 7 p.m., Denise had delivered a comprehensive file on Meredith Chen, including photographs of her and Richard entering a boutique hotel in Seattle 3 weeks ago and records of a joint investment account they'd opened 6 months earlier. "These are definitely not just business meetings," Denise confirmed via phone. "Based on the hotel records and expense patterns, they've been meeting regularly since at least last fall." Last fall, around the same time Richard had suggested revising the trust terms. The pieces fit together with nauseating precision. At 7:30 p.m., Richard called to say his client meeting was running late and he wouldn't be home until after 9. I assured him it was fine, that I understood how important his work was, playing the same supportive wife role I'd performed for 15 years. The performance felt hollow now, but I infused my voice with the same warmth he'd expect, the same woman he thought would be blindsided tomorrow. "I've got a surprise for you tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying that practiced excitement I now recognized as artificial. "For our anniversary." "I can't wait," I replied, and at least that part wasn't a lie. After hanging up, I contacted Nathan, confirming everything was in place for the transfers. We had identified 12 charitable organizations my father had supported during his lifetime, from the Oregon Symphony to the Portland Homeless Youth Initiative. Each would receive substantial donations before midnight, completely legally and in accordance with the trust's philanthropic provisions. "The paperwork is ready," Nathan confirmed. "I just need your final authorization." "Not yet," I replied. "Let's wait until Richard's home. I want to be sure of his intentions." The truth was, some small part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some explanation beyond the obvious betrayal, that 15 years of marriage couldn't end with such calculated cruelty. That hope died at 9:45 p.m. when Richard finally came home, bringing with him the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume and a wrapped gift box that I recognized from Portland's most expensive jewelry store. The same store where he'd bought me nothing for the past 3 anniversaries, claiming we should be more practical at our age. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, kissing my cheek with practiced affection. "Client dinner ran long. You didn't wait up for the champagne, did you?" I gestured to my half-empty glass. "Started without you. There's plenty more for tomorrow's celebration." "Perfect!" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which were already checking his watch. Less than 27 hours until he gained control of my inheritance. "I should review some documents before bed. Big day tomorrow." "Of course," I replied evenly. "Don't stay up." "Too late. I want you well rested for our special day." Once Richard disappeared into his office, I sent a single text message to Nathan. "Proceed with all transfers as discussed. Complete before midnight." His reply came immediately. "Initiating now. Will confirm when complete." In our bedroom, I changed into nightwear and slipped between sheets that now felt contaminated by lies. Richard joined me an hour later, maintaining the charade of normalcy as he set his alarm and wished me good night. I pretended to drift off, listening as his breathing deepened into sleep. At 11:58 p.m., my phone vibrated silently beneath my pillow. A message from Nathan. "All transfers completed and confirmed. 1975 dollars distributed to designated charities as instructed. Remaining $250K left in trust to maintain minimum balance requirements. Documentation filed. Sleep well." Richard stirred slightly beside me, unconscious and unaware that his perfect plan had just disintegrated. By this time tomorrow night, he would announce his desire for divorce, expecting to walk away with control of millions that no longer existed. "Happy anniversary to us," I whispered again, but this time with the first glimmer of satisfaction I'd felt since overhearing his phone call. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, I had reclaimed my power. My father's legacy would help thousands of people across Portland, instead of funding Richard's new life with Meredith. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Richard had spent months planning the perfect way to end our marriage. But he was about to discover that I would write the final chapter of our story. I woke before sunrise, Richard still sleeping soundly beside me, blissfully unaware that his perfect plan had been dismantled while he dreamed. For a moment, I studied his face, the strong jawline I'd once found so attractive, the slight crease between his brows that deepened when he was concentrating on investment prospectuses, the lips that had whispered both love and lies. 15. Years of marriage reduced to this strange liminal space, still legally bound, emotionally severed, with him unaware of the chasm between us. I slipped from bed silently, wrapping myself in the cashmere robe he'd given me last Christmas. Probably Meredith's selection, I realized now. In the kitchen, I made coffee and carried it to the bay window overlooking our carefully landscaped garden. Dawn was breaking over Portland, the city slowly illuminating beneath a canvas of pink and gold. Our anniversary day had arrived. My phone vibrated with a text from Zoe. Everything set for tonight, team briefed. Nathan confirmed final documentation. Delivered to your secure email. I smiled, feeling a sense of calm certainty that had eluded me throughout the night. By telling no one but my closest confidants, I'd maintained the element of surprise, something Richard had tried to deny me with his calculated timing. The sound of the shower upstairs told me Richard was awake. I took a deep breath, preparing to maintain the charade for 12 more hours. The performance of my life, with the highest stakes imaginable. When Richard appeared in the kitchen, freshly showered and dressed in the crisp blue shirt I'd given him last year, he played his part perfectly, dropping a kiss on my head, commenting on how beautiful the day was, asking innocently if I had special plans before our dinner. Just the usual Friday meetings, I lied smoothly, though I might take a longer lunch to get my hair done, special occasion and all. Excellent idea, he approved, checking his watch, a habitual gesture that now carried sinister significance. I've got back-to-back client meetings until 6, but everything's arranged for tonight, 7 o'clock, right here. Looking forward. To it? I replied, maintaining eye contact until he looked away first. After Richard left, I moved with deliberate efficiency. First, I forwarded all the evidence I'd gathered to Nathan, Denise, and my personal email, ensuring multiple secure backups existed. Next, I called the catering company, confirming that tonight's dinner would proceed with one crucial modification. The chef would be briefed on potential dramatic developments and prepared to clear out quickly if signaled. Mrs. Cambridge, is everything all right? The catering manager asked, concern evident in her voice. Everything's perfect, Jennifer, I assured her. Just some theatrical elements to tonight's celebration that might require discretion. At 10 a.m., I arrived at my design firm's headquarters in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. The exposed brick and soaring windows had always filled me with pride. This space represented everything I'd built on my own, separate from Richard's financial world. Today, it felt like a sanctuary. My management team was waiting in the conference room, expressions ranging from concern to confusion. None except Zoe knew why I'd called this emergency meeting. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began, maintaining the composed demeanor that had earned me respect in Portland's competitive design world. I've gathered you because significant changes are coming, and I want you to hear it from me first. For the next hour, I outlined what would likely happen in the coming days. My impending divorce, the financial restructuring, the media attention that might follow given Richard's prominence in investment circles. I didn't share the details of his betrayal or my countermeasures, merely the practical implications for our firm. The most important thing to understand, I concluded, is that Cambridge Design is completely insulated from my personal situation. Our client contracts, our operating capital, our creative assets, all are securely under corporate ownership, untouchable in divorce proceedings. Relief washed over their faces, followed by expressions of support that nearly cracked my carefully maintained composure. Marco, my creative director, spoke first. Whatever you need, Olivia, this team stands with you. Always, Zoe added, the only one who understood the full scope of what would unfold tonight. Their solidarity fortified me for the next phase. While the team returned to work, I sequestered myself in my office with Denise, who had arrived carrying A discreet portfolio. "Everything you asked for," she said, spreading surveillance photos across my desk. Richard and Meredith entering the boutique hotel in Seattle. Richard visiting a jeweler. Not the one where he'd bought my anniversary gift, but a different one known for its engagement rings. Financial documents showing how they'd begun moving assets into joint investment vehicles 6 months ago. "And this is the most damning," Denise continued, placing a printed email in front of me. Meredith to Richard, dated 4 months ago, discussing their new life once the trust situation is resolved. She specifically references waiting until after the transition date. The email confirmed everything. Richard and Meredith had timed their relationship milestones around my father's trust. Their entire future hinged on Richard gaining control of my inheritance today. "What's your next move?" Denise asked, studying me with professional assessment. "Information control," I replied. "I need to ensure Richard can't spin this as me vindictively emptying accounts after learning about the divorce. The timeline is crucial." Denise nodded approvingly. "Smart. The charitable donations need to appear as decisions made weeks ago, unrelated to today's revelations." "Exactly. Which is why I need one more thing from you." I outlined my final request. Surveillance documentation proving Richard had been planning this for months, coupled with evidence that my philanthropic planning predated any knowledge of his betrayal. "Creating a counter-narrative," Denise nodded. "Consider it done." By noon, Nathan had confirmed that all 12 charitable organizations had processed the wire transfers and issued official acknowledgments. The Portland Children's Hospital was particularly effusive in their gratitude for the $5 million endowment establishing the Cambridge Family Pediatric Care Fund, a project that would support thousands of children for decades to come. The documentation trail is rock solid, Nathan assured me via secure video call. Philanthropic planning memos dating back 3 months, preliminary discussions with foundation directors, even that charity gala you hosted in February where you publicly mentioned wanting to honor your father's legacy. Richard would have an extremely difficult time proving these donations were reactive rather than planned. And the trust itself? Maintains minimum required reserves of $250,000. Technically still intact, just significantly reduced in value. As of midnight last night, the transition to co-trustee status will proceed as scheduled. Richard will gain equal administrative authority over what remains. I smiled at the elegant simplicity. So, nothing was actually prevented or obstructed. The trust transition happens exactly as documented. Precisely. You've fulfilled every legal obligation. The fact that the trust now contains significantly less than Richard expected is unfortunate timing for him, but not legally problematic for you. After ending the call with Nathan, I received a text from my hairstylist confirming my appointment. The one cover story I'd actually implemented. Looking immaculate tonight was part of my strategy. Richard wouldn't be the only one with theatrical timing. As I prepared to leave for my appointment, Marco appeared in my office doorway, holding a large presentation portfolio. "The Westbrook Hotel renovation designs," he explained, setting the portfolio on my desk. "I know today is complicated, but I thought you might want to review these before Monday's client meeting. The Westbrooks are expecting your personal touch on the ballroom concepts." His thoughtfulness touched me. Even amid personal chaos, life and business continued. Clients still needed their projects completed. Teams still required leadership. Marco wasn't just delivering designs, he was reminding me that my professional identity remained intact, regardless of Richard's betrayal. Thank you, I said, genuinely grateful. I'll review them this weekend. We've got your back, Olivia, he said simply before leaving. At the salon, I allowed myself a brief respite from strategy and counter-strategy, surrendering to the soothing rhythm of being pampered. My stylist, Serena, worked her magic while I sipped champagne and flipped through design magazines, projecting the image of a woman excited about her anniversary celebration. You look stunning, Serena declared as she finished, turning my chair toward the mirror. The woman reflected back at me was polished, elegant, and unreadable. Exactly the image I needed to project tonight. Let Richard think he held all the cards until the moment I revealed my hand. On the drive home, Zoe called with updates. Everything's proceeding perfectly. The caterers arrive at 6. Denise delivered the final documentation to Nathan. Your overnight bag is packed and waiting at my apartment for after tonight. And Richard? His assistant confirmed he left the office at 4, not heading home. Denise tracked him to that jewelry store on Madison. Another gift for Meredith. No doubt. The extravagance of his betrayal was almost impressive. Planning anniversary surprises for me while simultaneously purchasing gifts for his mistress, all while orchestrating my financial devastation. Remember, Zoe added, no matter what happens, tonight you've already won. The money is safe, the documentation is ironclad, and tomorrow is a new beginning. Her words centered me. Tonight wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming my power and protecting my father's legacy from someone who had never truly valued either. At home, I moved through our anniversary preparations with deliberate care. The dining room was transformed with flowers and candles, vintage champagne chilling, Richard's favorite music cued on our sound system. To any observer, it would appear I'd created the perfect anniversary celebration, blissfully unaware of what was coming. In our bedroom, I dressed with meticulous attention, selecting a deep burgundy dress that Richard had always admired. Vintage, jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, subtle perfume. Every detail calculated to reinforce his assumption that I remained oblivious to his plans. At precisely 6:45 p.m., the caterers arrived, setting up the intimate dinner service Richard had requested. By 6:55, everything was perfect. The stage set for his carefully orchestrated performance. At 7:03, Richard's key turned in the front door. He entered carrying roses and the small wrapped box from yesterday, the picture of a devoted husband celebrating a milestone anniversary. His expression as he took in my appearance was appreciative, though I now recognized the calculation behind his smile, assessing how emotionally vulnerable I would be after an evening of romantic nostalgia. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek and presenting the roses with practiced charm. "Thank you," I replied, accepting both the flowers and the compliment with a smile that revealed nothing. Happy anniversary. Dinner proceeded exactly as Richard had planned. We reminisced about our early days together, shared wine from the vineyard where we'd honeymooned, exchanged seemingly heartfelt observations about our years together. Through it all, I maintained the performance, engaged, affectionate, entirely unsuspecting. After the main course, Richard signaled to the catering staff, who discreetly retreated to the kitchen, giving us privacy for dessert and coffee. This, I knew, was his planned moment, after softening me with nostalgia and wine, before I'd had time to process or think strategically. "Olivia," he began, reaching for my hand across the table. "These 15 years have been incredible." I noticed he spoke in past tense, a subtle tell. "We've built so much together," he continued, his expression shifting to one I now recognized as carefully rehearsed sincerity. "Which makes what I need to tell you even more difficult." I allowed, my expression to shift from contentment to slight confusion. "What is it, Richard?" He squeezed my hand, the pressure meant to be comforting but feeling predatory instead. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about what we both need at this stage in our lives." I remained silent, watching him execute the script. He'd undoubtedly practiced with his lawyer. "The truth is," he continued, voice dropping to a gentle register that had once made me feel cherished, but now rang hollow, "I think we've grown in different directions. Your design firm, my investment work, we barely see each other these days." The audacity was breathtaking. He was framing his betrayal as mutual growth apart rather than his calculated deception. "I'll always care for you deeply," he pressed on, "but I believe we'd both be happier if we ended our marriage." There it was, the moment he'd been building toward for months, timed perfectly with the trust transition. I allowed my expression to register shock, then pain, giving him exactly what he expected. A woman blindsided by betrayal on her anniversary. "You want a divorce?" I repeated, my voice deliberately unsteady. Relief flickered across his face at my predictable response. "I know the timing is terrible, and I'm so sorry for that. But yes, I think it's best for both of us." I withdrew my hand from his, letting tears fill my eyes. Real tears, though not for the reason he assumed. I was mourning 15 years given to someone who had seen me only as a means to an end. "Is there someone else?" I asked, following the script he would expect. Richard hesitated just long enough to confirm everything. "This isn't about anyone else, Olivia. This is about us." Another lie. I stood abruptly, moving to the window, giving him the reaction his plan required. Emotional distress, confusion, the vulnerability that would make me easier to manipulate during settlement negotiations. "I don't understand," I said softly. "After 15 years, on our anniversary." Richard approached, placing his hands on my shoulders in a gesture meant to appear comforting. "I wanted to be honest with you. You deserve that much." Did I laugh? The sound that escaped me might have been mistaken for a sob, but it contained all my knowledge of his dishonesty, his affair, his financial manipulations. "Honest," I repeated, turning to face him. "That's an interesting choice of word." Something in my tone must have alerted him that this wasn't proceeding according to plan. A slight furrow appeared between his brows. "I've already spoken with Andrew," he said, referencing his attorney. "He's prepared settlement papers that are very generous. You'll be well taken care of." I smiled then, really smiled, and watched confusion flicker across his face. "That's thoughtful," I said, moving to retrieve my phone from the sideboard. "But I've made some arrangements of my own." Wariness replaced his practiced concern. "What arrangements?" I pulled up the email Nathan had sent earlier displaying the official charitable donation receipts. I decided to honor my father's memory by continuing his philanthropic legacy. The Cambridge Foundation received the majority, but I made sure all his favorite causes were included. Richard's expression remained blank for a moment before understanding began to dawn. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that yesterday, I donated $19,750,000 to charity from my father's trust." The paperwork was already in process for months, of course, all properly documented in the foundation minutes. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. You can't. Can't what, Richard? Donate my own inheritance? The trust was solely in my name until midnight last night. The transition to co-trustee status proceeded exactly as scheduled. You now have equal control over the remaining assets. Remaining assets? His voice had risen an octave. How much is left? $250,000, the minimum required to maintain the trust's legal status. He staggered slightly, reaching for the back of a chair to steady himself. You knew. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I overheard your call with Andrew yesterday about serving me divorce papers after our romantic anniversary dinner, right before the trust transition date. Quite the coincidence. This is theft, he hissed, his charming facade evaporating completely. I'll challenge these donations in court. You'll what? I interrupted, calm in the face of his growing rage. Sue the Portland Children's Hospital to reclaim their new pediatric wing? Force the women's shelter to return funds already allocated to expanding their facilities? That would play wonderfully in the press. I retrieved a second file from my bag, spreading photographs across the dining table. Richard and Meredith entering the hotel, Richard at the jewelry store, email printouts detailing their plans. Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain to a judge how you and Meredith Chen planned this divorce around my father's trust transition date. How you've been moving assets into joint accounts for months. How you planned to announce our divorce the night before gaining control of my inheritance. Richard's face had gone from pale to ashen. You had me followed. No, Richard. I had Meredith followed. After she called our home for the 12th time last month, the surveillance was a courtesy add-on. He sank into a chair, the magnitude of his miscalculation finally registering. The money is really gone? All of it? Not gone, I corrected. Transformed. From potential funding for your new life with Meredith into cancer research, homeless youth programs, arts education. My father would be proud. He never liked you much, you know. The naked defeat on Richard's face brought me no joy, only confirmation that I'd read him correctly all along. He hadn't loved me in years, if ever. The money had always been his primary attachment. I'll still file for divorce, he said finally, a weak attempt to reclaim some control. Of course you will, I agreed pleasantly. I've already instructed Nathan to prepare my response when you do. Given the evidence of your affair and financial misconduct, I don't anticipate a protracted legal battle, unless you'd prefer to have your firm's clients see these? I gestured to the photographs. Richard stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. The accommodating wife he'd taken for granted had vanished, replaced by a woman who had outmaneuvered him at his own game. You can keep the house, I continued, gathering the photographs. It's too large for one person anyway. I've already found a loft downtown, closer to my office. You planned all this, he said slowly, in one day. Actually, the donations were planned over several months, I corrected, maintaining the narrative that would protect me legally. The timing was coincidental. Unfortunate for you, certainly. I moved toward the door, retrieving my coat and keys. Richard remained frozen at the table, surrounded by the romantic anniversary setting that now seemed like a particularly cruel joke. The caterers will clean up, I said. I've already taken what matters to me. You might want to call Meredith. Explain that the trust fund you promised her underwent some modifications. His head snapped up at that. How did you know about your promises to her? Those private chat logs you forgot to close on your laptop were quite enlightening. Once the trust transfer completes, we'll have everything we need to start fresh. Such romantic planning. For the first time, genuine shame crossed Richard's face. Not for betraying me, but for being caught so thoroughly. Goodbye, Richard, I said, opening the front door to the life I'd carefully constructed over 15 years, and was now walking away from on my own terms. Happy anniversary. As I stepped into the cool evening air, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. All done? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. All done. Coming to you now. The night stretched before me, full of uncertainty, but also possibility. I had honored my father's legacy, protected his hard-earned wealth from someone who had never deserved it, and discovered my own strength in the process. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: legal proceedings, public revelations, the dismantling of 15 years together. But tonight, as I drove through Portland's glittering streets toward the friendship and safety waiting at Zoe's apartment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The life Richard had tried to destroy had already been reborn, transformed by fire into something stronger, wiser, and unmistakably mine. That's thoughtful, I said, moving to retrieve my phone from the sideboard. But I've made some arrangements of my own. Wariness replaced his practiced concern. What arrangements? I pulled up the email Nathan had sent earlier, displaying the official charitable donation receipts. I decided to honor my father's memory by continuing his philanthropic legacy. The Cambridge Foundation received the majority, but I made sure all his favorite causes were included. Richard's expression remained blank for a moment before understanding began to dawn. What are you saying? I'm saying that yesterday, I donated $19,750,000 to charity from my father's trust. The paperwork was already in process for months, of course, all properly documented in the foundation minutes. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. You can't what, Richard? Donate my own inheritance? The trust was solely in my name until midnight last night. The transition to co-trustee status proceeded exactly as scheduled. You now have equal control over the remaining assets. Remaining assets? His voice had risen an octave. How much is left? $250,000, the minimum required to maintain the trust's legal status. He staggered slightly, reaching for the back of a chair to steady himself. You knew. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I overheard your call with Andrew yesterday about serving me divorce papers after our romantic anniversary dinner. Right before the trust transition date. Quite the coincidence. This is theft, he hissed, his charming facade evaporating completely. I'll challenge these donations in court. You'll what? I interrupted, calm in the face of his eye. Growing rage. Sue the Portland Children's Hospital to reclaim their new pediatric wing? Force the women's shelter to return funds already allocated to expanding their facilities? That would play wonderfully in the press. Richard's face contorted, with a rage I'd never witnessed before. For a moment, I feared he might become physical, but his self-preservation instinct won out. Instead, he snatched his phone, frantically scrolling through his contacts. I'm calling Andrew right now, he threatened, stabbing at the screen. We'll file an emergency injunction. We'll freeze the transfers. I waited patiently as he paced, listening to his attorney's voicemail, then trying again. On the third attempt, Andrew finally answered, and Richard put him on speaker, perhaps thinking the legal authority would intimidate me. "Richard, it's nearly 10 p.m. Is everything—" "She emptied the trust," Richard interrupted, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Olivia donated $20 million to charity yesterday. We need to stop it. Now." The silence that followed spoke volumes. When Andrew finally responded, his tone was carefully measured. "Did you say she made donations yesterday? Before today's conversation?" Yes, Richard snapped impatiently. "She must have found out somehow. We need to reverse the transfers." Another pause. "Richard, if the donations were made while she was sole trustee, and if there's documentation showing these were planned philanthropic decisions rather than reactive measures, are you saying there's nothing we can do?" Richard demanded, incredulously. "I'm saying we need to proceed very carefully," Andrew hedged. "Challenging charitable donations is extremely difficult from both legal and public relations perspectives, especially if she has evidence these were planned before any knowledge of divorce discussions." Richard's eyes snapped to mine, finally registering the full extent of my preparation. I smiled pleasantly, gesturing to the folder on the sideboard, containing all the backdated memos Nathan had prepared. "Andrew, I'll call you back," Richard said curtly, ending the call. He advanced toward me slowly, as if seeing me for the first time. "How long have you been planning this?" "The donations? For months," I replied smoothly, maintaining our legal fiction. "My father always intended his wealth to support causes he cared about. I was simply fulfilling his wishes before the trust transition." "You expect me to believe this is coincidental timing?" His laugh was brittle. "That you just happened to empty the trust the day before I told you about the divorce." I shrugged elegantly. "Believe what you want, Richard. The documentation supports my timeline. The transfers are completed and legally binding. The organizations have already begun allocating funds to their projects." Richard's eyes narrowed as he processed this, his tactical mind finally overtaking his emotional reaction. "Fine. Keep playing innocent. But understand this. There are other assets. The house, your company, our investments. I'll take everything." "You're welcome to try," I replied calmly. "But before you escalate this further, perhaps you should see what else I discovered yesterday." I retrieved a second file from my bag, spreading photographs across the dining table. Richard and Meredith entering the hotel. Richard at the jewelry store. Email printouts detailing their plans. Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain to a judge how you and Meredith Chen planned this divorce around my father's trust transition date. How you've been moving assets into joint accounts for months. How you plan to announce our divorce the night before gaining control of my inheritance. Richard's renewed outrage faltered as he processed the evidence before him. "You had no right to protect myself? Gather evidence of your affair and financial misconduct? I think any reasonable person would disagree." As he flipped through the photographs and emails, the full magnitude of his miscalculation began to register. His carefully orchestrated plan had not only failed, but backfired spectacularly. "What do you want?" he finally asked, defeat creeping into his voice. "Nothing that isn't mine," I replied simply. "A fair division of our marital assets. Truly fair. Not the manipulated settlement your attorney drafted. Full ownership of my company, which you never contributed to anyway. and a quiet, dignified end to our marriage. I have no interest in public scandal. And if I refuse? A last, desperate attempt to assert control. I gestured to the evidence, spread across the table. Then these go to the managing partners at your firm, to your clients, to the lifestyle section of the Oregonian, which has always been so fond of covering our charitable work. I paused deliberately. And to Meredith's father, who I believe sits on the ethics committee at Seattle Capitol. That last point struck home. Charles Chen was notoriously protective of both his daughter and his firm's reputation. Learning that Meredith was involved in a scheme to divert trust funds would destroy not only her relationship with Richard, but potentially her career. Richard sank into a chair, the magnitude of his defeat finally settling over him. You've thought of everything. Not everything, I corrected. Just enough to protect what matters. We sat in silence for several moments, the remnants of our anniversary dinner growing cold between us. Finally, Richard looked up, his expression unreadable. I didn't start out planning to hurt you, he said quietly. Things with Meredith just happened. And the trust transition timing? The offshore accounts? The divorce papers prepared months ago? Did those just happen too? He had the grace to look away. One decision led to another. It became strategic. Yes, I agreed. Very strategic. Just not in the way you intended. I stood, gathering the evidence into my folder. The confrontation had unfolded differently than I'd imagined during those sleepless hours last night. Instead of vindication, I felt a profound weariness, coupled with an unexpected sense of liberation. The man before me was a stranger, one I no longer needed to understand or accommodate. I'll be staying at a friend's tonight, I said, retrieving my coat. You can reach me through Nathan starting tomorrow. I suggest you instruct Andrew to work with him on settlement terms that reflect our new reality. Richard watched me with hollow eyes as I moved toward the door. At the last moment, he called out, "The money really meant that much to you? Enough to give it away rather than let me have it?" I turned back, studying the man I'd spent 15 years loving, supporting, believing in. It was never about the money, Richard. It was about honoring my father's legacy instead of letting you pervert it. He built something meaningful. Now, so have I. Without waiting for his response, I stepped out into the cool evening air. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "All done." "All done," I replied. "Coming to you now." As I drove through Portland's rain-slicked streets, the weight of 15 years seemed to lift with each passing mile. Richard had planned to strip me of my inheritance, my dignity, and my agency, all in one carefully orchestrated evening. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, the clarity to see both him and myself with unflinching honesty. By midnight, news of Richard's failed plan had spread through our small circle. Zoe's apartment became command central, with Denise arriving to debrief, Nathan checking in via video call, and my oldest friend Claire bringing wine and sympathy after hearing the condensed version of events. "I still can't believe you pulled this off in less than 24 hours, Claire marveled, refilling my glass. When Paul left me for his dental hygienist, I spent 3 days crying in my bathrobe. This wasn't about heartbreak, I explained, realizing it was true as I said it. This was about justice. My father worked his entire life building that fortune. Richard saw it as nothing but a means to fund his next chapter with Meredith. Strategic indeed, Nathan commented from the laptop screen, where he was reviewing post-confrontation notes. Richard's mistake was assuming you would react emotionally rather than tactically. A rather sexist miscalculation. His first of many, Denise added dryly. My sources say Meredith is already distancing herself. Apparently, a man who loses $20 million through poor planning isn't quite the financial genius she thought she was getting. The observation sparked unexpected laughter from all of us, breaking the tension that had been building for hours. It wasn't just humor, though. It was a release of the fear, anger, and uncertainty that had been my constant companions since overhearing Richard's phone call. So what happens tomorrow? Claire asked, voicing the question that hovered beneath our momentary levity. Tomorrow, I said, drawing strength from the circle of support surrounding me, I start rebuilding. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving Portland gleaming under clear skies. I woke on Zoe's sofa to the smell of coffee and the distant sound of the city coming alive. For the first moment since overhearing Richard's call, I felt fully present, unburdened by the need for performance or deception. Morning, warrior, Zoe greeted, setting a steaming mug beside me. Nathan called. Richard's attorney reached out for preliminary settlement discussions. They're suddenly very eager to resolve things amicably. I sipped the coffee, considering this development. Damage control. Richard's reputation in financial circles is built on his image as a masterful strategist. This fiasco undermines that entirely. Exactly. Nathan thinks we can leverage their eagerness for discretion to secure favorable terms. He's drafting a proposal. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, Meredith Chen. I showed the screen to Zoe, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. Interesting. Are you going to answer? After a moment's consideration, I accepted the call, activating the speaker. Olivia. Meredith's voice was tightly controlled, professional. I think we should talk. I agree, I replied calmly, though I'm not sure what remains to be said. Richard told me what happened. A pause. Not everything, obviously, but enough. I want you to know I never intended to help him target my inheritance, to time your relationship milestones around my father's trust transition. The evidence suggests otherwise, Meredith. Another pause, longer this time. I made poor choices, unethical ones, but I'm trying to correct that now, which is why I'm calling. I'm listening. Richard has been contacting my father, attempting to leverage his connections to challenge your donations. I thought you should know. The warning was unexpected. Why tell me this? Because my father asked for the full story, and I gave it to him, including the timeline Richard and I discussed. He was... She hesitated. Deeply disappointed in my judgment. He's instructed me to make amends however possible. Understanding dawned. Charles Chen, financial titan and ethics stickler, had discovered his daughter's involvement in Richard's scheme. This wasn't just Meredith trying to salvage her conscience. This was career preservation. I appreciate the information, I said carefully. Is there anything else? Yes. Meredith's voice strengthened. My father would like to meet with you. He's impressed by your handling of the situation and has some thoughts about your charitable foundation. My charitable foundation? Repeated, catching Zoe's widened eyes. The one you established with your donations yesterday? My father sits on several philanthropic boards and believes your approach could be expanded regionally. It seemed Richard's miscalculation continued. to yield unexpected dividends. Tell your father I'd be happy to meet him. Nathan has my availability. After ending the call, Zoe and I sat in stunned silence before bursting into simultaneous laughter. Only you, Zoe finally managed, could turn your husband's affair partner into a networking opportunity with one of the Pacific Northwest's biggest financiers. Life does take unexpected turns, I agreed, a new sense of possibility blooming. Speaking of which, I should check on the donation's impact. The next hours were filled with calls to the various organizations that had received my father's legacy. The Portland Children's Hospital administrator couldn't contain her emotion as she described how the Cambridge Pediatric Fund would transform their ability to serve underprivileged families. The Women's Shelter Director outlined plans for a new transitional housing program that would help hundreds of domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. The Arts Council detailed an education initiative that would bring creative programs to schools throughout Oregon's rural communities. Each conversation reinforced what had been merely theoretical yesterday. Richard's attempt to appropriate my father's wealth for his own benefit had instead catalyzed profound good throughout the community. The money wasn't just preserved from his greed. It was actively creating positive change. Nathan arrived mid-morning with settlement papers and updates. "Richard's in full retreat mode," he reported, spreading documents across Zoe's dining table. "They've dropped all talk of challenging the donations and are now focused solely on dividing the remaining assets. What's their proposal?" "Surprisingly, reasonable. Richard keeps the house but buys out your equity share. All business interests remain with their respective founders. Your design firm to you, his investment practice to him. Retirement accounts split proportionally based on contribution." I examined the terms carefully. "What's the catch?" "Absolute confidentiality. Richard wants ironclad NDAs from everyone involved. You, me, Zoe, Denise, everyone who knows the full story. His reputation is his primary concern now." "Of course it is," I murmured, not surprised. "Financial consequences he can recover from. Reputational damage in his industry could be fatal." "Exactly. So we have significant leverage. What do you want to negotiate for?" I considered the question carefully. Yesterday, confronting Richard had been about preventing injustice. Today, with the immediate threat neutralized, I needed to focus on my future. Full intellectual property rights to all Cambridge design projects, even those Richard provided consulting for. Expedited timeline. I want this resolved in weeks, not months, and I want written acknowledgement that he will make no future claims against any charitable initiatives I establish using my family name. Nathan nodded approvingly. "All achievable. Anything else?" "Yes, I want my grandmother's sapphire earrings returned. They were never rightfully his, though he's kept them. In his safe for protection since we married. Sentimental value?" "And principle," I confirmed. "They represent my family's legacy as much as the trust did. They belong with me." By afternoon, Nathan had secured preliminary agreement to all terms, with formal settlement papers to follow, within days. Richard, eager to contain the situation, had capitulated to every significant demand, his only focus now preventing the story from spreading through Portland's business community. "Where will you go from here?" Zoe asked as we reviewed the settlement details. "Back to your normal life?" I smiled at the notion. I'm not sure normal exists anymore, but forward, definitely forward. My phone buzzed with a message from Marco at the design firm. Emergency meeting with Westbrook Hotels. They've doubled their renovation budget and want to discuss expanding the project to their Seattle property too. Monday, 9 a.m.? Starting right now, in fact, I added, showing Zoe the message. It seems Cambridge Design is about to expand. By evening, what had begun as the worst crisis of my life had transformed into a launch pad for its next chapter. I'd spoken with Charles Chen, who was interested in backing a formal charitable foundation bearing my family name. The Portland Business Journal wanted to profile my firm's upcoming expansion. 3 of the organizations receiving donations had invited me to join their boards. As Zoe and I shared dinner in her apartment, a full 24 hours after my world had imploded, she raised her glass in a toast. To unexpected blessings. And to decisive action, I added, clinking my glass against hers. My phone lit up with a final text from Nathan. Richard signed everything. It's done. Just like that. 15 years of marriage concluded with a signature, not on the timeline Richard had planned, but on mine. The inheritance he'd coveted was now permanently beyond his reach, transformed into a legacy that would help thousands. The woman he'd underestimated was emerging stronger than before. Outside, Portland glittered beneath a clearing sky, the rain washed, streets reflecting city lights like scattered stars. I stepped onto Zoe's balcony, breathing deeply of the fresh, rain-cleansed air. I should be devastated, I said softly as Zoe joined me. My marriage is over. My life is completely upended. Everything I thought was true about the past 15 years has been revealed as manipulation. But, she prompted gently, but I feel liberated, like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even recognize until it was gone. We stood in companionable silence, watching the city pulse with life below us. Finally, Zoe spoke. You know, what impresses me most about how you handled this? Not the quick thinking or the perfect counter-timing. What then? The fact that you transformed an act meant to harm you into one that helps so many others. You didn't just protect yourself. You created something meaningful out of his betrayal. Her observation resonated deeply. Richard had intended to use my father's wealth to fund his new beginning with Meredith. Instead, that wealth would now provide medical care for children, shelter for vulnerable women, arts education for underserved communities, causes my father had valued throughout his life. The ultimate revenge, I mused, isn't punishment. It's turning someone's attempt to destroy you into the catalyst for your greatest contribution. The insight felt like a key unlocking something essential. For all his strategic brilliance, Richard had fundamentally misunderstood both me and the true value of my inheritance. He'd seen only money to be acquired. I'd recognized legacy to be honored. What will you do first? Zoe asked. With your new beginning? I considered the question, feeling possibilities unfurl before me like a map to unexplored territory. Visit the Children's Hospital. See firsthand what the donation is creating. Then expand Cambridge Design. We've outgrown our current space. Anyway. Maybe look at properties in Seattle since we'll be working there too. And personally? Heal, I said simply. Learn to trust again, eventually. Remember who I was before Richard's influence began shaping my choices. Zoe nodded. Understanding. You know, when you first told me Richard was planning to divorce you, I was ready to help you fight for every penny. I never imagined we'd end up giving most of it away. Neither did I admitted. But it feels right. That money was never meant to be a prize in a divorce settlement. It was meant to create impact. As night deepened around us, I felt a profound sense of alignment. Yesterday's betrayal had forced me to make split-second decisions that would alter the course of many lives, including my own. In choosing to donate the inheritance rather than let Richard claim it, I'd acted instinctively, prioritizing principle over possession. "Tomorrow's a new day," Zoe said, echoing my thoughts. "You're first as the woman who outmaneuvered Richard Cambridge at his own game." I smiled at the characterization. Not how I expected to be defined at 40, but I'll take it. Inside, my phone buzzed with another message. The Portland Children's Hospital director sending preliminary renderings of the new pediatric wing that would bear my family name. Looking at the images of a facility that would serve thousands of children for decades to come, I felt a swell of something powerful and healing. Richard had planned to use our anniversary to end our marriage and claim my inheritance. Instead, he'd inadvertently helped me discover my own strength and transform my father's legacy into something far more valuable than money in an investment account. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, finalizing the divorce, restructuring my company, establishing the foundation's formal operations. But tonight, standing on Zoe's balcony overlooking the city I loved, I knew with absolute certainty that Richard's attempt to diminish me had only revealed my true capacity. In trying to write my ending, he had merely set the stage for my most authentic beginning. 6 months after what I now called the anniversary revelation, I stood at the podium of the Portland Civic Auditorium, looking out over a sea of faces gathered for the official launch of the Cambridge Foundation. The room glowed with soft light, the evening's elegance a sharp contrast to the thunderstorm raging outside, not unlike the tumultuous night that had birthed this moment. "Welcome," I began, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. 6 months ago, a personal crisis forced me to make a decision about my father's legacy. That decision has blossomed into something I never could have imagined. From the front row, Zoe gave me an encouraging nod. Beside her sat Claire, Nathan, Denise, and Marco, the inner circle that had helped me transform betrayal into purpose. Further back, I spotted Charles Chen, now our foundation's most influential supporter, flanked by representatives from every charitable organization we'd funded. "My father believed that wealth carried responsibility," I continued, the words flowing naturally now. "He built his fortune not as an end in itself, but as a means to create positive change. Tonight, we formalize his vision with the establishment of the Cambridge Foundation, dedicated to expanding access to healthcare, education, and opportunity throughout the Pacific Northwest." As I outlined our mission and introduced our first slate of initiatives, I felt a profound sense of alignment. The inheritance that Richard had coveted as his personal prize had instead become a catalyst for community transformation. The trust that he'd schemed to control was now funding pediatric research, women's empowerment programs, and educational initiatives that would impact thousands of lives for decades to come. "Sometimes," I told the attentive audience, "our greatest contributions arise from our most challenging moments. 6 months ago, I faced a crossroads. Today, I'm grateful for the path it revealed." The applause that followed felt like a benediction, not just for the foundation, but for my own journey from devastation to determination. As I stepped away from the podium, Charles Chen rose to speak about the foundation's economic impact projections. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a decorative mirror near the stage. The woman looking back at me was transformed from the one who had stood frozen in her doorway half a year earlier. My posture was straight, my eyes clear and focused, my smile genuine rather than practiced. I had shed not just a deceptive husband, but the accommodating persona I'd cultivated to maintain a marriage that had been built on calculation rather than connection. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Claire appeared at my elbow with champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "Though I'm still not sure how you pulled off all this in 6 months. The foundation, the expanded design firm, the new life. It's remarkable." "Necessity driving innovation," I replied with a smile, though I certainly didn't do it alone. "Speaking of innovation," Claire lowered her voice, "have you seen who just arrived?" I followed her gaze to the entrance, where Thomas Elliot had appeared, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored suit. As Portland's most respected architect, his firm had collaborated with Cambridge Design on several projects over the years, though always through intermediaries. Richard had considered him a rival and had subtly discouraged direct contact, a boundary that, like so many others, I'd recently crossed. "He RSVP'd," I said, feeling an unexpected flutter of nervousness. "We're discussing a joint venture for the Seattle expansion." Claire's eyebrow arched knowingly. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Because the way he's looking at you suggests more than architectural schematics." I laughed, shooing her away as Thomas approached. At 52, just a few years older than me, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his silver-streaked dark hair and thoughtful eyes conveying both intelligence and warmth. "Olivia," he greeted me, his smile reaching his eyes in a way Richard's calculated expressions never had. "Congratulations. This is extraordinary." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him, especially on such a stormy night. I wouldn't have missed it. He glanced around the elegant space. "Your foundation's work with the Children's Hospital alone would merit attendance, but I confess I had personal motivation as well." "Oh?" "I wanted to discuss our Seattle collaboration in person, and perhaps," he added with a hint of hesitation, "that was endearing from someone so accomplished. See if you might consider dinner next week. To discuss the project, of course." The invitation hung between us, professional on the surface but with undercurrents that both of us recognized. 6 months ago, still reeling from Richard's betrayal, I wouldn't have been ready. Now, having rebuilt both my professional life and my sense of self, the prospect of connection, even just exploratory, felt not threatening but possible. "I'd like that," I replied simply. Our conversation was interrupted by Nathan, who approached with subtle urgency. "Olivia, a moment?" Excusing myself from Thomas, I followed Nathan to a quiet corner. "What is it?" "Richard's here." The statement landed like a stone in still water, ripples of surprise spreading through me. "Here? At the foundation launch? Why?" "Unclear. He's at the entrance, requesting to speak with you briefly. Security is awaiting your decision." In the 6 months since our confrontation, Richard and I had communicated only through attorneys. The divorce had finalized 3 months earlier with surprising efficiency, Richard's eagerness to avoid public scandal making him uncharacteristically amenable to my terms. Last I'd heard, he'd relocated to Seattle, his partnership with Meredith having dissolved along with our marriage. "What do you want to do?" Nathan asked when I didn't immediately respond. I considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, the sight of Richard would have triggered a complex swirl of anger, pain, and vindication. Now I felt only mild curiosity. "I'll speak with him, briefly." "I'll stay within eyesight," Nathan assured me, his protective instinct touching. Richard waited in the foyer, looking simultaneously familiar and foreign. He'd lost weight, and a new tension lined his face, but his attire remained impeccable, his armor against the world unchanged. "Richard," I greeted him neutrally. "This is unexpected. Olivia." He shifted slightly, uncharacteristically uncertain. "You look well." "Thank you. What brings you here?" He glanced past me to the celebration continuing in the main hall. "I saw the announcement about the foundation launch. I wanted to." He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "I wanted to congratulate you. What you've built is impressive." The compliment seemed genuine, which made it more surprising. "Thank you, though I'm still curious why you'd attend in person." Richard's gaze returned to mine, directness replacing his initial hesitation. "I've been doing some thinking over these past months, about choices, consequences, about legacy." I waited, allowing the silence to draw him out rather than filling it as I might have done during our marriage. "The trust funds," he continued finally. "You were right about what my plans would have meant for your father's legacy. I convinced myself I was entitled to that money, that my financial expertise meant I would use it more effectively than you could." His mouth twisted in a wry, self-deprecating smile. "Recent events have made me reevaluate my expertise." "Recent events?" "My firm lost several major clients after our divorce. Nothing explicit, just adjustments in investment strategy that gradually shifted portfolios away from my management. Charles Chen's influence, I suspect, though nothing I could prove." I maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly I wasn't entirely surprised. Chen had proven to be both a powerful ally and a formidable opponent. "It's been educational," Richard admitted. "Humbling, even. Watching what you've created with the money I tried to take, it's forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself." "Why tell me this now?" He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a small velvet box that I recognized immediately. "Your grandmother's sapphire earrings. I kept them after the divorce settlement, telling myself they were compensation for what I'd lost. That was petty. They belong with you." I accepted the box, oddly moved by this small gesture that signified more than the valuable jewelry inside. "Thank you." Richard nodded, then produced an envelope as well. "Also this. It's a personal check. My contribution to the Pediatric Research Initiative. Not a large amount by your foundation's standards, but it's what I can manage now." I examined the check, noting that the amount, while not enormous, represented a meaningful sacrifice given his diminished circumstances. "This is unexpected." "It's not atonement," he clarified quickly. "I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. But seeing what you've built from what could have been destruction, it's made me want to be part of something constructive for once, even in a small way." The Richard standing before me was not the calculating strategist who had planned to blindside me on our anniversary, nor the outraged opponent who had threatened legal action when his plan collapsed. This was someone I'd rarely glimpsed during our 15 years together, a person capable of reflection and, perhaps, growth. "Your contribution will help fund pediatric cancer research," I said finally. "Every dollar matters to those families. That's all I ask." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. I saw Thomas Elliot arrive earlier. He's a good man, better than I was." The observation hung between us, neither a blessing nor a warning, but a simple acknowledgement. I nodded, accepting it as intended. "Goodbye, Richard." He offered a final nod before disappearing into the stormy night, leaving me standing in the foyer with my grandmother's earrings and an unexpected contribution to the foundation born from his betrayal. The encounter felt like the closing of a circle, the final resolution of unfinished business. Nathan approached cautiously. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I replied, surprised to find it true. "Everything is fine." Back in the main hall, the celebration continued in full swing. I rejoined the gathering, accepting congratulations and discussing future initiatives with donors and partners. Throughout the evening, I caught Thomas's gaze occasionally, his warm smile offering a different kind of possibility than I'd known before. As the event wound down, Zoe found me near the displays showcasing our first projects. "Successful night," she observed, though I noticed Richard made an appearance. "Problem?" "Actually, no." I showed her the velvet box and the check. "More? Like, closure." "Well, that's unexpected," Zoe admitted. "Though I suppose 6 months of watching his master plan implode might prompt some reflection." "Perhaps. Or maybe seeing the Foundation's actual impact made a difference. Either way, it feels like the final page of that chapter." We stood in comfortable silence, surveying the room as staff began the subtle work of clearing away empty glasses and rearranging furniture. Charles Chen approached, his customary gravitas softened by genuine approval. "The evening exceeded expectations," he stated, his highest form of praise. "The announcement of the Seattle expansion particularly excited our partners there." "I'll be visiting next week to finalize arrangements," I replied. "Thomas Elliott and I are collaborating on the architectural vision." Chen's eyes flickered with interest at the mention of Thomas. "An excellent choice. His restoration of the Williamson building demonstrated remarkable integrity, both structural and ethical." His deliberate word choice brought a smile to my face. In the months since Richard's scheme had collapsed, Chen had become not just a foundation supporter, but a personal mentor of sorts, his guidance helping me navigate the complex waters of high-level philanthropy. His approval of Thomas felt significant, though I was careful not to place too much weight on it. My days of seeking validation from powerful men were behind me. "We should discuss the Vancouver possibility before you leave for Seattle," Cheney continued. "My contacts across the border are expressing interest in your healthcare model." "I'll have my assistant schedule time," I promised as he moved on to speak with other departing guests. Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Vancouver? You're expanding internationally now?" "Exploring possibilities," I clarified. "Nothing certain yet." 6 months ago, you were a successful interior designer with a seemingly perfect marriage. Now you're running a multi-city foundation, expanding your design firm across the Pacific Northwest and potentially going international. Zoe shook her head in wonder. All because Richard picked the wrong day to plan his betrayal. Her observation struck me as both accurate and incomplete. "Not just because of his timing," I corrected gently. "Because when confronted with destruction, I chose creation instead." As the last guest departed and the event staff continued their efficient breakdown of the celebration, I found myself drawn to the wall displaying photographs of the Foundation's first initiatives. Children in the newly equipped hospital playroom, women learning technical skills in the employment program, students engaged in the arts education project. Each image represented lives touched by the redirected inheritance. My father's legacy transformed rather than appropriated. Marco joined me, his gaze following mine to the display. "When you told us about the divorce 6 months ago, I worried about what it would mean for you, for the firm. I never imagined this." "Neither did I admitted. "When I made those donations, I was focused on protecting my father's money from Richard. I didn't fully comprehend what it would become. That's how the best journeys often start, Marco observed. Not with a grand vision, but with a single step born of necessity. His insight resonated deeply. Each decision over these past 6 months, from the initial donations to establishing the foundation, from expanding Cambridge design to considering new relationships, had built upon the one before it, creating a path I couldn't have envisioned on that fateful anniversary night. By midnight, the auditorium had emptied except for our core team, gathered now in the small VIP lounge for a private toast before dispersing into the stormy night. "To the Cambridge Foundation," Nathan proposed, raising his glass. "May it continue to transform lives across the region." "To unexpected blessings," Claire added, echoing our toast from 6 months earlier. "To Olivia," Thomas contributed, his gaze meeting mine with warmth, "who turned crisis into opportunity with grace and vision." As glasses clinked, I felt a profound sense of completion alongside new beginning. The trauma of Richard's betrayal hadn't disappeared, such wounds never vanish entirely, but it had been incorporated into a larger narrative of growth and purpose. The anger that had fueled my initial response had transmuted into focused determination. The pain of deception had evolved into clearer perspective about authentic connection. Later, as I prepared to leave, Thomas offered to walk me to my car, holding an umbrella against the persistent rain. The simple courtesy, offered without calculation or expectation, highlighted by contrast the transactional nature of so many interactions during my marriage. "I meant what I said earlier," Thomas remarked as we navigated puddles in the parking structure. "What you've built in 6 months is extraordinary." "It's been a team effort," I replied, thinking of everyone who had helped transform betrayal into blessing. "True, but teams need leaders. Vision sets direction." He stopped as we reached my car, turning to face me fully. "You've created something meaningful from what could have been merely tragic. That's rare." His observation touched a truth I'd been gradually recognizing over these months. The night I discovered Richard's betrayal, I'd acted initially from self-protection and righteous anger. But somewhere along the way, those motivations had evolved into genuine purpose, a commitment to honoring my father's legacy that transcended reaction to Richard's schemes. "Will you really consider dinner next week?" Thomas asked, his expression open and direct. "Not just to discuss the Seattle project?" I smiled, feeling possibility unfurl. "Yes, I'd like that very much." As I drove home through Portland's rain-washed streets, I reflected on the distance traveled in 6 months. The woman who had stood frozen in her doorway, champagne flute trembling in her hand, had been defined largely in relation to others. Richard's wife, her father's daughter, the supportive partner behind a supposedly brilliant financial strategist. The woman navigating through the storm tonight was defined by her own choices, her own vision, her own capacity to build rather than break. At home, my new loft in the Pearl District, filled with objects and art I'd chosen solely for myself, I changed into comfortable clothes and curled up in the window seat overlooking the city. The storm had intensified, lightning occasionally illuminating Portland's skyline in stark, beautiful relief. My phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. Perfect. Launch. Seattle next week? Then Vancouver? The Cambridge Empire expands. I smiled at her enthusiasm, typing back, one thoughtful step at a time. After she responded with a thumbs-up emoji, I set the phone aside and opened the velvet box Richard had returned. My grandmother's sapphire earrings caught the light, their deep blue stones unchanged despite all the hands they had passed through. They represented continuity amid transformation, legacy amid reinvention. As I closed the box, my gaze fell on the framed photograph beside it. My father and me at my college graduation, his pride evident in his smile. He had built his fortune through patient dedication to creating value, not through financial manipulation or strategic deception. In redirecting his legacy from Richard's grasp to community benefit, I had honored not just his wealth but his values. Lightning flashed again, briefly transforming raindrops on my windows into glittering diamonds. The moment captured perfectly what these 6 months had taught me. Perspective changes everything. What looks like devastation from one angle becomes illumination from another. On that anniversary night when Richard announced his desire for divorce, he'd thought he was orchestrating my ending. Instead, he had inadvertently catalyzed my most authentic beginning. By attempting to claim my inheritance, he had prompted me to discover its true purpose. By betraying my trust, he had freed me to build something more valuable than our marriage had ever been. As the storm gradually subsided, giving way to the gentle rhythm of ordinary rain, I felt a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, foundation initiatives to implement, design projects to complete, new relationships to explore. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of both storm and celebration, I recognized the profound truth that had emerged from crisis. Our greatest power lies not in controlling circumstances, but in choosing how we respond to them. Richard had chosen deception, manipulation, strategic exploitation. I had chosen creation, contribution, transformation. His choices had diminished him, while mine had revealed capacities I hadn't known I possessed. 6 months ago, in a moment of crisis, I'd transferred his anticipated inheritance to charity, an act born of self-protection and righteous anger. Today, that single decision had blossomed into purpose and meaning beyond anything I could have imagined. The money that might have funded his new life with Meredith was instead funding new lives for thousands of others, while simultaneously revealing a new and stronger version of myself. The foundation launch wasn't just a celebration of philanthropic impact. It was confirmation that endings often contain beginnings, that loss often reveals opportunity, that our most painful moments sometimes connect us to our greatest purpose. Richard had planned to write my ending on our anniversary night. Instead, he had merely set the stage for a story much larger and more meaningful than either of us had imagined possible. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion against my windows, no longer a storm but a soothing reminder of renewal. I thought of Thomas, of the Foundation's expansion, of Cambridge Design's growing influence, of all the possibilities unfolding before me, possibilities I might never have discovered had Richard not revealed his true nature on our anniversary. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive in the most painful packages. Sometimes our most difficult endings reveal our most authentic beginnings. Sometimes, as I had learned these past 6 months, the very moment designed to destroy us becomes the catalyst for our greatest creation. Richard had planned to serve me divorce papers on our anniversary and seize control of my inheritance by midnight. Instead, by midnight, I'd transferred his anticipated windfall to charity, and in doing so, had unknowingly transferred myself from victim to victor, from reactor to creator, from ending to beginning. The woman who had whispered, "Happy anniversary" to us with bitter irony 6 months ago, now whispered, "Thank you" to the universe with genuine gratitude. not for the betrayal itself, but for the strength, purpose, and clarity it had ultimately revealed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new connections. Tonight, I embraced the profound understanding that had emerged from crisis. When someone tries to write your ending, they sometimes inadvertently hand you the pen to write a far better story than you ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.